Introduction. You already know what your bad habits are. You've felt the frustration of repeating the same patterns, promising to stop, swearing that this time will be different, only to find yourself falling back into the same loops again. Maybe it's procrastination. Maybe it's the endless scroll, the late-night binge, the missed workout, the second-guessing, the self-sabotage. Whatever the habit, the cycle is the same: impulse, regret, repeat. And the worst part? You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're simply running on a system that was never designed to help you thrive. A system made of neural shortcuts, unconscious patterns, and emotional associations that silently guide your behavior day after day, even when your conscious mind wants something different. This audiobook isn't about surface-level tips. It's not about vague motivation or pushing harder. It's about the science behind your habits, how they form, why they stick, and, most importantly, how to rewire your brain to break free from the patterns that are holding you back. What most people don't realize is that your habits are not the problem. They're the byproduct of an underlying system. You don't have a procrastination problem. You have a trigger, reward loop problem. You don't have a phone addiction. You have a dopamine conditioning problem. You don't lack motivation. You lack environmental design and identity alignment. The truth is, every habit, good or bad, exists for a reason. It serves a psychological, emotional, or neurological function. And unless you identify that reason and redirect it, trying to just stop, a habit will feel like trying to hold your breath underwater. Eventually, the system pulls you back in. This is where most people fail. They rely on motivation. They depend on willpower. They use short-term hacks and surface-level fixes, unaware that their brain is constantly reverting to the strongest neural path, the one that's been reinforced by years of repetition. But there's good news. The brain is not fixed. It is malleable. It can be reshaped, rewired, and retrained, not through willpower, but through process, through repetition, through identity, through micro-adjustments, environmental tweaks, and systems that make discipline automatic. In this audiobook, you'll learn how to break bad habits not by resisting them, but by replacing the cue-response-reward loop with one that actually serves you. You'll learn the neuroscience behind your impulses, how dopamine wires your desires, and how to take advantage of neuroplasticity to reprogram the very structure of your thinking. You'll learn how to redesign your environment so it supports success by default. You'll learn how to link your habits to your identity, so that success is no longer something you chase, it's something you are. You'll learn how to bounce back quickly when you slip, without spiraling into shame or starting over from scratch. And most importantly, you'll walk away with a blueprint to build real discipline. Not performative discipline, not temporary productivity, but long-term, sustainable self-control that shows up even when motivation doesn't. This audiobook is not about perfection. It's about traction, moving forward one layer at a time, stripping away the old wiring that no longer serves you and installing new circuits of clarity, strength, and purpose. Because your habits are not just routines, they're votes for who you are becoming. And if you're ready to stop casting votes for the version of you that keeps staying stuck, if you're ready to rewire your mind, if you're ready to build discipline and success into your daily default. Chapter 1. The Habit Loop Exposed. Every behavior you repeat, whether it's something productive like journaling every morning or destructive like scrolling your phone for hours at night, is a result of a neurological loop embedded deep within the brain. And while it may feel like you're simply acting on instinct or reacting to your environment, the truth is that you're executing a pattern that has been trained into you through years of reinforcement, subtle repetition, and unconscious reward processing. At the core of every habit is what scientists call the habit loop, a simple yet powerful structure that explains why habits exist, how they're formed, and, most critically, how they can be broken and rebuilt from the inside out. And once you understand this loop, you gain leverage over your mind in a way most people never do. The loop consists of three main parts: cue, routine, and reward. And sometimes a fourth hidden element, craving, which intensifies the feedback cycle and strengthens the habit's emotional grip over time. Let's start with the cue, the trigger. It can be anything: A time of day, a location, an emotion, a sound, a smell, even the presence of another person. And once the brain has been conditioned to associate that cue with a specific behavior, the rest of the loop activates automatically, without conscious intention, like a well-worn groove on a record. Then comes the routine, the behavior itself. The thing you do in response to the cue, which could be checking your phone, biting your nails, opening a snack, lighting a cigarette, yelling in frustration, or endlessly replaying anxious thoughts. It doesn't matter if it's physical or mental. Once the cue hits, the brain initiates the pre-programmed behavior that has been run so many times it no longer requires active input. Finally, there's the reward, the chemical or emotional payoff your brain experiences at the end of the routine. And this is the part that locks the habit into place, because every time your brain receives pleasure, relief, or resolution as a result of that behavior, it remembers, this works. Do it again next time. Over time, that loop becomes automatic. Not because it's helpful, not because it's logical, and definitely not because it's aligned with your goals, but simply because it has been rehearsed so often that your brain now conserves energy by outsourcing the decision to your unconscious wiring. This is why bad habits are so hard to break, because they don't need your permission anymore. They're stored in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for routine behaviors. And once something enters that system, it becomes difficult to intercept with conscious thought. Which is also why relying solely on willpower is a flawed strategy, because by the time you've noticed the urge, the behavior is already halfway done. But here's where things get really important. That habit loop can't simply be deleted. Your brain doesn't erase pathways that have been rewarded. It only rewires them when a stronger alternative exists. In other words, you don't stop a bad habit by fighting it directly. You replace the routine while keeping the cue and delivering a new, healthier reward. Let's take a common example. Every time you feel stressed, cue, you reach for your phone and start doom scrolling. Routine, which gives you momentary distraction and dopamine. Reward. You try to stop. You put your phone away, you tell yourself you're wasting time, you try to be better, but the next time stress hits, your brain goes right back to the familiar loop because it still believes that's the best way to resolve the discomfort. If you want to break that cycle, you can't just remove the phone. You have to replace the routine with something that gives your brain a similar emotional payoff, like a 5-minute walk, breath work, or journaling your thoughts. And you must do it repeatedly, because only repetition teaches the brain that the new routine is just as effective or better. But that's not all. You also need to recognize the craving underneath the loop, which is often emotional, not logical. You don't just crave the phone. You crave relief from anxiety. You don't just crave the cigarette. You crave a sense of calm. You don't just crave the binge. You crave a feeling of control or a distraction for pain. And the more honest you are about that craving, the more precise you can be in designing an alternative that addresses it directly, rather than hoping brute force will carry you through. This is how you expose the loop. You look at each piece of the behavior and say, what triggers me? What am I really trying to feel? What am I doing that gives me this feeling? And what could I do instead that would create a similar result without destroying my goals, my energy, or my confidence? And make no mistake, this is not a one-time insight. It's a practice. It requires repetition, tracking, emotional honesty, and conscious effort, especially in the beginning. But once you identify the loop and deliberately replace its middle routine with one that aligns with your identity and goals, you begin to take back control of the autopilot program that used to run you. In the coming chapters, we're going to walk step by step through how to identify your personal habit triggers, how to insert intentional pauses into the loop, and how to reprogram your reward systems so that your brain begins to crave growth the same way it once craved comfort. But for now, your task is simple. Start noticing. Notice when you feel the urge. Pause and ask yourself, what just triggered me? What do I want to feel right now? And what am I about to do in response to that? Because the more awareness you build around your habit loops, the more power you reclaim over your choices. And once you reclaim your choices, you're no longer a passenger in your own life. You become the architect. Let's move to Chapter 2, where we'll explore the power of awareness in breaking unconscious behaviors, and why noticing is often more powerful than resisting. Chapter 2. Awareness is the first weapon. Before you can change anything, before you can rebuild your routines, break old patterns, replace toxic behaviors, or rewire your identity, you have to become acutely, painfully, and consistently aware of the exact loops running your life, because what you're not aware of, you cannot interrupt, and what you cannot interrupt, you'll continue to repeat no matter how strong your willpower or how badly you want to change. The first and most overlooked step in habit transformation is not motivation, nor action, nor even discipline. It's observation. Noticing, tracking, watching your behavior without judgment, without denial, and without excuses. Because the moment you begin to see yourself clearly is the moment you regain power over choices you previously believed were automatic, fixed, or out of your control. Most people never reach this stage, not because they're lazy or incapable, but because the modern world is perfectly engineered to keep you unaware. Your attention is constantly pulled outward by screens, notifications, scrolling feeds, background noise, and dopamine loops so tight you don't even realize you're reacting until the habit has already run its course. We live in a state of habitual distraction, moving from task to task, trigger to trigger, click to click, and craving to craving without ever stopping to ask why we're doing what we're doing. And so, when people try to change their habits, they often approach it from the outside in. They try to change the action without first understanding the mechanism behind it. But real change requires inside-out awareness. It requires stepping back from your day and asking questions like, when do I reach for this habit? What am I feeling right before I do it? What pattern keeps showing up in this specific situation? What am I avoiding, soothing, or chasing? Because when you slow down long enough to ask these questions, not just once, but daily, you begin to interrupt the blind spots that run your behavior on autopilot. Think about it like this. Your bad habits are like invisible scripts written into your day. They activate without your permission, run to completion, and leave you wondering how you ended up wasting hours, breaking promises to yourself, or repeating patterns you swore you'd outgrown. But the moment you shine light on those scripts, they start to lose power. That's why awareness is not just a step, it's a weapon. It's the first tool that allows you to intervene in the loop. And once you become someone who notices their own impulses, you begin to create space between the urge and the action. And in that space, everything becomes possible. Now, how do you develop this kind of awareness? Not by thinking harder, not by trying to remember, but by tracking. With pen and paper, with digital notes, with voice memos, with anything that pulls your unconscious habits into the conscious light of day. Start simple. Every time you notice yourself doing something you want to change, whether it's biting your nails, checking your phone, zoning out, grabbing a snack, or avoiding a task, just stop and record. What was I doing right before this? What was I feeling emotionally? What triggered the urge? What story was I telling myself in that moment? How do I feel now that I've done it? These 5 simple prompts will expose more about your patterns in 1 week than most self-help books will in a year, because your behavior doesn't lie, but it does hide until you go looking for it. And the key is, do this without judgment. Don't turn this into another performance, another perfectionist ritual, or another way to beat yourself up. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to see clearly. Because the goal is not to catch yourself so you can feel bad. The goal is to catch yourself so you can build new options. Let's say you realize that every time you feel anxious, you reach for sugar. Or every time you feel insecure, you open social media. Or every time you feel overwhelmed, you distract yourself with YouTube or busy work. Once you know this, you can start inserting micro-pauses, moments where you ask yourself, is this what I actually need? Or what's another way I could respond to this feeling? And those micro-pauses are where transformation begins, not through dramatic effort, but through conscious interruption. Now here's the real challenge. Awareness takes practice, not talent. It's not something you unlock once and keep forever. It's a muscle you build by slowing down and observing yourself in the real world, not just in your imagination. So don't expect it to be comfortable. At first, you may not like what you see. You'll realize how often you act on autopilot, how frequently you run to your default behavior, how quickly you give in to urges you didn't even realize you had. But that discomfort is progress. It means you're waking up. It means the patterns are no longer invisible. And once they're visible, you can start choosing something different. So for the next 7 days, I challenge you to treat your life like an experiment. Don't try to fix anything yet. Just watch, observe, notice the loops. Use a journal, use a notes app, use your voice, whatever works for you. Just don't go another day blind to the habits that are shaping your future. Because the only thing worse than a bad habit is a bad habit you don't even know you have. And once you bring that habit into the light, you take the first and most powerful step toward breaking it. Not by force, but by understanding. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the science behind rewiring your brain through repetition. How consistent input changes neural pathways, and how the habits you feed become the ones that run your life. Chapter 3. Rewire through repetition. Rewiring your brain doesn't happen through motivation, nor through sudden decisions made in moments of inspiration, but through slow, deliberate, and consistent repetition of new behavior. Because the brain doesn't change by hearing something once, or even by understanding it intellectually, but by doing it over and over again until it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like you. Most people drastically underestimate the role of repetition in transformation. They want change to be exciting, new, emotional, a breakthrough, a high, a spark of fire that suddenly rearranges everything inside of them. But real change, lasting change, doesn't look like that. Real change is boring. Real change is mechanical. Real change is built through consistency. Tiny actions repeated so often that they forge new grooves in your brain, replacing the old loops with stronger, sharper, more aligned ones. Your brain is not static. It is not fixed. It is not locked into the patterns you were born with, or the conditioning you absorbed in childhood, or the habits you practiced for the last 10 years. Your brain is a living, shifting, adaptive machine. It is a workbench covered in circuits, and every time you repeat a thought, an action, or a response, you reinforce that circuit and increase the likelihood that it will fire again in the future. This is the science of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself based on what you do repeatedly. When you understand this, you realize that you are never stuck in a bad habit. You're simply reinforcing a pathway that's been traveled too many times. And the only way to weaken that path is to build a new one right beside it, through repetition. Let's make it real. Let's say you want to stop reaching for your phone every time you feel bored. You've probably been doing this for years. Cue: boredom, routine, scroll, reward, distraction, or stimulation. This loop has fired so many times that it's now ingrained, carved deep into your neural network. Trying to resist it through willpower might work temporarily, but eventually, your brain will default to the stronger pathway, the one it knows best. To change this, you need to introduce a new behavior, something you can do instead, something accessible, simple, and satisfying enough to serve as a viable alternative. That might be taking 10 deep breaths. It might be standing up and stretching. It might be jotting down one thing you're grateful for. The behavior itself isn't as important as the consistency with which you perform it. Because in the beginning, the new behavior will feel foreign. It won't feel automatic. It won't feel satisfying. It won't produce the same dopamine hit your brain is used to. But with repetition, that begins to change. Your brain starts to recognize the new pattern. The new loop gets strengthened. And if you stick with it, even when it feels awkward, even when you mess up, it eventually becomes the dominant path. This is how all behavior change works. You don't erase the old path. You let it weaken from disuse. You don't need to destroy it. You simply stop feeding it. And instead, you pour your energy into the new path every single day. The key is repetition with awareness. Doing the new behavior often enough that your brain starts to shift its default, and doing it consciously enough that you notice how you feel, how you're responding, how you're growing. Because repetition without awareness is just motion. But repetition with awareness is transformation. Now here's something most people get wrong. They expect the new habit to feel good immediately. They try it for 3 days, maybe a week, and then they say it's not working because it doesn't feel as satisfying as the old one. But the reason it doesn't feel good isn't because it's wrong. It's because it hasn't been repeated enough to fire the same emotional rewards in your brain. Dopamine is not just released when you experience a reward. It's also released in anticipation of the reward. And that anticipation comes from prediction, and prediction comes from pattern recognition, which only happens after repetition. So in the early stages of a new habit, you have to generate patience, the understanding that the emotional payoff will come later after you've trained your brain to expect it. This is especially important when it comes to building discipline-related habits. Waking up early, exercising, journaling, meditating, eating clean, because these habits often don't feel amazing right away. They require energy. They demand discomfort. They challenge your defaults. But if you repeat them long enough, through the messy middle, through the days you don't feel like it, through the resistance, you build new wiring, and eventually, what once felt hard becomes what now feels natural. That's when you've rewired. That's when the brain says, this is who we are now. And once that happens, discipline is no longer something you force. It's something you follow. Let's get practical. Pick one habit you want to build. Just one. Not 5, not 10. One. Make it ridiculously small. So small you can't fail. If it's writing, commit to 2 sentences a day. If it's reading, read 1 page. If it's exercise, do 5 push-ups. Then repeat it every single day, without fail. Track it. Celebrate it. Don't let the simplicity fool you. Because it's not about the action, it's about the pattern. You're not building a habit. You're building a brain that sees that habit as normal. And that is the only way to make change last. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to break the triggers that keep pulling you into the old loops. The environmental, emotional, and social cues that must be redesigned if your repetition is going to stick. But for now, remember this. Your brain is a pattern machine. Feed it the right pattern often enough, and it will forget how to be anything else. That's how you rewire. That's how you win. Chapter 4. Break the trigger chain. If repetition is what rewires the brain, then triggers are what start the rewiring process, for better or worse. And until you learn to take control of the things that spark your habits, you will always be one step behind, constantly reacting, constantly managing impulses after they've already begun to take shape, constantly playing defense against a system that was built to activate without your consent. And here's the truth most people never fully grasp. Your environment is a silent architect of your behavior, not just your physical space, although that matters more than you think, but also your emotional environment, your digital environment, your social environment, and the invisible patterns of tension, boredom, stress, reward, and routine that subtly shape the architecture of your mind and, in turn, determine how and when your habits take over. Every habit you've built, good or bad, started with a trigger. That trigger might be a sound, a scent, a time of day, a certain room, a specific person, a spike in emotion, or a predictable moment like the end of a work session or walking into your kitchen after dinner. And because your brain is wired for efficiency, not logic, it learns to associate these triggers with behaviors that produce predictable outcomes, regardless of whether those outcomes are beneficial to your goals or deeply harmful to your well-being. Take this example. You feel anxious. That's the emotional cue. You open TikTok. That's the routine. You feel distracted or momentarily entertained. That's the reward. Your brain says, got it. Next time we feel anxious, we'll do that again. Now imagine that cycle repeating 100 times or 1,000. By then, the trigger and the routine are so tightly fused that the behavior no longer feels like a decision. It feels automatic. It feels like who you are. It becomes identity-level behavior. Not because you were born with it, but because the loop has run uninterrupted for too long. So how do you break that chain? How do you interrupt the loop before it starts? You begin by identifying your most common triggers. Not just broadly, I eat when I'm stressed, but precisely, I eat when I walk past the vending machine after 2 p.m. on days I didn't sleep well and have meetings back-to-back. Because specificity is clarity, and clarity is what allows you to create interventions. Start by looking at your 3 most frustrating habits. Ask yourself, what usually happens right before this behavior? What emotion, location, or situation do I keep seeing show up just before I fall into this loop? Are there people or apps or phrases that consistently serve as activation points? What do I see, hear, or feel that sets me off? Once you identify those triggers, you can start doing what I call friction designing. Intentionally increasing the difficulty of the bad behavior while decreasing the difficulty of the desired behavior. It's not about trying harder. It's about making the wrong thing harder to do and the right thing harder to ignore. Let's say your habit is late-night phone scrolling. What's the trigger? Maybe it's lying in bed at 11 p.m. after watching TV. So you set a timer on your router. Or you charge your phone across the room. Or you physically place it in another room entirely. You don't rely on willpower at midnight. You make the choice at 9 p.m. when you still have executive function. Or let's say the trigger is stress at work leading to snacking. Can you set a standing hydration reminder? Can you replace the snack drawer with a notepad and pen? Can you create a go-to breathing exercise that's faster and more rewarding than walking to the break room? Or maybe it's social media doom scrolling after seeing a certain friend post something that triggers your insecurities. Can you unfollow them? Mute them? Log out of your apps before you feel the urge. Build a new routine for those moments. The idea isn't to eliminate discomfort. It's to replace the current trigger response pairing with something more conscious, more useful, more aligned with who you want to become. And if you can't eliminate a trigger entirely, you can still reprogram your reaction to it. For example, if anxiety is your biggest trigger, then rather than trying to avoid it, which is impossible, you train yourself to respond differently. You install a new response loop: anxiety breath work, stress microjournaling, overwhelm movement, craving interruption ritual. What matters most is that you are ready for the trigger, not blindsided by it. Because when you're prepared, you're powerful. When you're prepared, you're no longer stuck reacting. And every time you notice the cue and choose a different routine, you're not only disrupting the old circuit, you're literally installing a new one. Now here's something no one tells you. Most triggers are stacked. They're not just one moment. They're a sequence. Waking up late, skipping breakfast, feeling frazzled, reacting emotionally to an email, breaking a commitment, feeling like a failure, falling into numbing behavior, guilt, repeat. This is the trigger chain, a cascading series of small, seemingly insignificant moments that, when left unchecked, culminate in you falling into the exact behavior you swore you'd stop. And the solution isn't to fix the last link in the chain. It's to cut the first one. Wake up earlier. Prepare breakfast the night before. Pause before replying to the email. Notice the first drop before the wave becomes overwhelming. The earlier you intervene in the chain, the less damage it does. So here's your challenge this week. Identify 3 common triggers for one of your most stubborn habits. Write them down. Break them down. Then decide what you will do the moment that trigger appears. Not later, not when you remember, but now. Create a new default. Prepare the tools. Practice the pause, because the brain follows patterns. And when you start breaking the trigger chain, you start breaking the behavior. Not by force, but by design. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when you try to remove a bad habit without replacing it, and why the brain resists that process unless you give it something better to hold on to. We'll talk about how to meet your emotional needs in healthier ways, and build routines that feel good enough to last. Chapter 5. Replace, don't remove. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to break bad habits is believing that removal alone is enough. That if they can just stop doing the thing, if they can resist the urge, deny the craving, hold back from the action, or simply avoid the trigger, they will eventually be free. But the truth is, your brain doesn't respond well to absence. It responds to replacement. Because you can't delete a habit from your neural architecture. You can only override it with something stronger, something more rewarding, something your brain can learn to choose instead. This misunderstanding is why so many attempts at change feel like a war, a never-ending tug-of-war between the version of you who wants to grow and the version of you who just wants comfort, escape, or relief. Because when you take something away that your mind has come to rely on, Even if that thing is destructive, you leave behind a void, and that void doesn't stay empty for long. It either pulls you back into the old loop or fills itself with a new distraction that may be just as damaging. You can't out-discipline emptiness. You can't tell your brain to just stop craving dopamine or stop seeking comfort or stop reacting stress, because those systems were built into your biology long before you formed conscious goals, and they're not going away. So if you want to win this battle, you need to stop trying to suppress the behavior and start asking, what does this habit actually give me? And how can I get that need met in a way that builds me instead of breaks me? Every habit, even the ones you hate, is doing something for you. It may be giving you relief, distraction, stimulation, emotional regulation, a sense of control, a pause from anxiety, or a quick hit of significance when you feel small. And if you try to take that away without replacing it, your brain will resist you every step of the way, not because it doesn't want you to succeed, but because it believes it's protecting you from emotional discomfort you haven't yet learned to face another way. Let's say your bad habit is mindless snacking. You don't just snack because you're hungry. You snack because you're bored or stressed, or because eating gives you a break in the day when nothing else does. If you just try to stop snacking without inserting anything in its place, you'll feel deprived, and that deprivation will eventually turn into rebellion. A moment of, I deserve this, or screw it, I've been good all day, or this one time won't matter, and the cycle continues. But if you decide every time that urge hits to walk outside for 5 minutes, or sip water with intention, or stretch and breathe, and give yourself the same pause in a different form, your brain will begin to associate those actions with the same relief it used to get from food. Not instantly, not magically, but through repetition and reinforcement. The same goes for social media scrolling, vaping, shopping, binge-watching, complaining, self-doubt, or procrastination. They all come with a reward, and until you build a new loop with a new reward, you're not rewiring anything. You're just restraining yourself, and restraint is not sustainable when your nervous system is wired to seek release. So the first step is to get clear on the purpose your habit serves. Ask yourself, when I do this, what feeling am I trying to create or escape? Is it escape from boredom? Relief from anxiety? Validation when you feel invisible? Control in a world that feels chaotic? Comfort when you're lonely? Stimulation when you're numb? Don't judge the answer. Just name it. Then ask, what else could meet this need in a way that moves me forward? That's your replacement habit. And don't make it complicated. Don't make it perfect. Make it available. Make it repeatable. Make it easy to reach for in the moment when the old loop would usually run. If you usually scroll your phone in bed to quiet your mind, could you keep a journal or a book by your pillow? If you usually smoke to decompress, could you step outside and take 5 deep breaths while listening to calming sounds? If you typically procrastinate by cleaning or snacking or organizing things that don't need organizing, could you set a timer for 5 minutes of deep work and reward yourself afterward? Remember, the goal isn't to match the exact intensity of the old reward. It's to retrain your brain to expect something different when the cue hits. And at first, the new routine might not feel satisfying. That's okay. That's expected. The old behavior is a highway, well-worn, familiar, easy to drive. The new behavior is a dirt trail, rough, uncertain, not quite rewarding yet. But every time you walk that trail, you make it clearer. Every time you show up with a new pattern, you make it stronger. Every time you interrupt the old loop with a new response, you cast a vote for the person who no longer needs the old solution. And that's what this is about. Not just changing your behavior, but changing the story your brain tells about who you are and how you deal with life. You're not just someone who used to scroll. You're someone who now reflects. You're not just someone who used to numb. You're someone who now breathes. You're not just someone who used to avoid. You're someone who now engages. But to make that real, you have to practice the replacement over and over again. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's not. And yes, there will be moments when you slip. Moments when you go back to the old behavior out of habit or exhaustion or emotion. That doesn't mean you've failed. That means you're rewiring. That means you're human. That means you're learning where the gaps still exist. The only failure is staying in the gap. So catch the moment. Return to the new pattern. Reinforce the new loop. Because your brain doesn't care about your goals, it cares about your patterns. Give it a better pattern, and it will follow. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to shift from behavior change to identity transformation. How to stop trying to do the right thing and start becoming the kind of person who does the right thing without question, without resistance, without delay. Chapter 6. Identity-Based Habit Change. If you've ever wondered why some habits feel nearly impossible to break, even when you have all the right tools, understand the psychology behind them, and have practiced new behaviors consistently, it's because true transformation doesn't happen at the surface level of behavior. It happens at the foundational level of identity, which means that the only way to make permanent change is to become the kind of person who no longer identifies with the version of themselves that needed the habit in the first place. You see, most people focus on the outer layer of change, what they want to do, what they want to stop doing, what actions they want to take or avoid. And while behavior is important, it's only the most visible layer of a much deeper system made up of patterns, beliefs, self-perception, and internal stories that operate quietly underneath every single choice you make. When you try to build a new habit without changing who you believe you are, you create internal resistance, because even if your conscious mind wants the new behavior, your subconscious mind is still running the old identity, and identity always wins. If you still see yourself as a procrastinator, then no matter how many productivity techniques you try, you will unconsciously sabotage your own momentum. If you still see yourself as someone who lacks discipline, then even if you force yourself into a workout routine or clean diet, you will revert the moment your willpower fades. If you still see yourself as someone with a sweet tooth, someone who's bad with money, someone who hates mornings, someone who just needs pressure to perform, then your brain will continue making choices that validate that identity. Not because it wants to ruin your life, but because it's programmed to protect what it believes to be true. An identity is not logic-based, it's experience-based. Your brain doesn't care about your goals. It cares about consistency. It cares about alignment. It cares about keeping the narrative intact, even if that narrative is hurting you. So how do you change that? How do you rewire your identity? You start by asking one of the most powerful questions in the psychology of behavior change. Who do I want to become? Not what do I want to do? Not what results do I want? But who do I want to be at the identity level? Because when you define the identity clearly, boldly, unapologetically, you can then reverse engineer habits that are aligned with that version of you. If you want to become a focused person, what would a focused person do in the first 10 minutes of their day? If you want to become a calm person, how would a calm person respond when triggered? If you want to become a high-performing, self-led, grounded version of yourself, what small decisions would that version of you make daily without negotiation? These are not just habits. These are identity reinforcements. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you cast a vote for that identity, and your brain takes note. I didn't snooze the alarm. That's a vote for being disciplined. I chose the water over the soda. That's a vote for being health conscious. I spoke kindly to myself after a mistake. That's a vote for being emotionally mature. And while one vote doesn't change the election, enough votes shift the identity. Eventually, the tipping point comes, the moment when the behavior no longer feels like effort because it's now a natural expression of who you believe yourself to be. That's when the rewiring sticks. That's when the old habit loses power. Not because you fought it harder, but because you became someone who simply doesn't relate to it anymore. This is why people who quit smoking and say, "I'm trying to quit," usually struggle more than those who say, "I don't smoke." The former is holding on to the old identity. The latter has stepped into a new one. An identity carries more weight than motivation ever could. So, let's make this real for you. Take one habit you want to break. Now ask, what identity is this habit reinforcing? If you constantly delay your goals, maybe that habit is reinforcing the identity of someone who avoids challenge. If you always say yes to things you don't want to do, maybe the habit is reinforcing the identity of someone who prioritizes people-pleasing over self-respect. If you numb with entertainment, maybe it reinforces the identity of someone who can't sit with discomfort or doesn't feel worthy of focus. This is not about shame. This is about awareness. Now flip the question. What identity would I need to build to make this habit irrelevant? That becomes your focus. That becomes your North Star. And from now on, every small action, every micro decision, every time you choose the new path, you remind yourself, I'm becoming the kind of person who underscore, and you fill in the blank, who protects their energy, who finishes what they start, who keeps their word, who respects their time, who takes care of their future self. You'll mess up sometimes. You'll revert. You'll forget. That's human. But the more you return to this identity framework, the more natural it becomes. You're not chasing results. You're becoming someone who attracts those results by default. Because when you change your identity, your habits change automatically. In the next chapter, we'll go even deeper into the reward system behind habits and how to train your brain to crave progress more than comfort. So, the new identity isn't just logical, it feels good to live. Chapter 7. Reprogram your reward system. At the center of every habit, beneath the repetition, beneath the trigger, beneath the identity, lives a reward, a neurological payoff, a moment of relief, pleasure, or emotional resolution that tells your brain, this was worth doing. And because your brain is wired not for truth or logic, but for reinforcement, it doesn't ask if the behavior is good for you in the long run. It only asks if it feels good in the short term, which is why so many of the habits that sabotage your life are the ones that feel the most satisfying in the moment you're doing them. This is the core of how your reward system works. Your brain releases dopamine, a chemical not only triggered by pleasure, but more powerfully by the anticipation of pleasure. And over time, that anticipation becomes attached to specific cues, environments, routines, or emotional states, meaning that just seeing your phone light up, or hearing the crinkle of a snack wrapper, or opening the Netflix app is enough to spike dopamine levels and pull you into a behavior loop before you've even had a chance to think it through. And here's the part most people don't understand. It's not the actual habit that keeps you coming back. It's the reward pathway that got wired into your brain when the habit first started delivering emotional payoffs. The late-night binge wasn't just food, it was relief. The endless scrolling wasn't just distraction, it was escape from a feeling. The vaping wasn't just nicotine, it was pause, it was control, it was a ritual. The arguing, the procrastinating, the checking, the numbing, all of it wasn't just about action. It was about emotion. It was about reward. And so if you want to break a bad habit, you can't just focus on stopping the behavior. You have to reprogram what your brain finds rewarding. Because until your brain starts to crave progress more than comfort, you'll keep choosing the familiar payoff, even when you hate the aftermath. The good news? Dopamine is trainable. You can teach your brain to anticipate satisfaction from a new behavior, but it won't happen passively. It won't happen automatically. It happens when you strategically attach reward to the things that build you and detach reward from the things that break you. Here's how you do it. First, make the new habit visibly rewarding. Your brain needs evidence that the new behavior is working, fast, clear, and consistent. If you're building a reading habit, track your pages. Put them on a wall. Use a habit tracker. Let yourself see the streak. If you're trying to stop impulse spending, log your savings. Make the number real. Watch it grow. If you're starting daily movement, write a one-line reflection after each session. Reflect on how your energy shifts. Don't just finish the action, reinforce the reward. The more immediate feedback you give your brain, the faster it rewires. Second, celebrate micro wins with real emotion. It may sound silly, but your brain responds to emotionally charged moments. And when you complete a small habit and follow it with a burst of internal praise, even a fist pump or a yes or a moment of intentional satisfaction, you're training your dopamine system to say, that felt good, do it again. Because you don't just build a habit by doing it, you build it by making it feel good to do. And this isn't about fake positivity or shallow self-congratulation. It's about creating a new emotional association. If the old habit gave you a dopamine hit, you must compete with that. Not suppress it, not deny it, but redirect it. Third, create delayed gratification rewards that tie effort to outcome. When you complete a full week of your habit, reward yourself. Not randomly, but strategically. Pick something aligned with your goals. A new book, a day off, a dinner out. Let the behavior feel sustainable and celebrated, not just obligatory. Because when your brain knows there's a payoff, it keeps showing up, and over time, the habit becomes self-reinforcing. Fourth, reframe what the old habit actually gave you. Not in fantasy, but in fact. The binge wasn't really relaxing. It left you bloated and guilty. The scrolling didn't really recharge you. It drained your time and peace. The smoking didn't really make you calmer. It just postponed the stress and created another need. The more clearly you remind your brain of the real cost of the old behavior, the more your reward system loses interest in it. And finally, attach your habits to identity-based rewards. The greatest form of dopamine is the feeling of integrity, the deep, quiet satisfaction of being the person you said you would be. When you follow through, not for applause, not for perfection, but because it's who you are now, you feel different, stronger, calmer, clearer, and that identity becomes the reward that sustains you. You begin to crave the feeling of showing up. You begin to crave the discipline. You begin to crave the clarity. You begin to crave alignment. This is the shift from reacting to your cravings to training them, from chasing cheap hits of reward to building rich ones, tied to progress, to self-respect, to vision, to growth. Because the question isn't whether you'll crave something, it's what you'll crave. And you can teach your brain to crave what builds you. You can teach your brain to feel satisfied, not by escape, but by execution. You can teach your brain to look forward to the moment when you don't quit, when you show up, when you align with your future self instead of your past pain. So this week, start tracking your wins. Start celebrating the smallest shifts. Start rewriting what reward means. Because your brain is listening, and it follows the emotion, not just the action. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to build mental discipline. Not by forcing yourself through massive change, but by stacking micro wins that create unstoppable consistency. Chapter 8. Build mental discipline through micro wins. When most people think of discipline, they imagine a kind of iron-willed stoic self-mastery, the ability to say no to temptation, to power through pain, to endure boredom or resistance or discomfort without flinching. And while that image may seem impressive, the truth is that real, lasting discipline rarely looks like that in practice. In fact, true mental discipline is not built through grand acts of willpower, but through the quiet repetition of micro wins, small, consistent choices that may feel insignificant in the moment, but when stacked day after day, form the foundation of a life you can be proud of. Because discipline isn't about intensity, it's about continuity. It's not about pushing yourself to the edge once in a while. It's about becoming the kind of person who shows up every single day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how motivated you are, regardless of whether or not anyone is watching. And that kind of consistency, the kind that builds unshakable confidence and rewires your nervous system to trust your own word, doesn't come from trying to conquer everything at once. It comes from narrowing your focus to one tiny, repeatable action you can succeed at today and doing that over and over and over again until your brain starts to believe, this is who I am now. Let's break this down. You don't become someone who meditates every day by forcing yourself to sit for an hour in silence. You become that person by sitting for 2 minutes every morning, no matter what. And over time, 2 becomes 5, 5 becomes 10, but the real shift happens not in the length of time, but in the identity you're forming through repetition. You don't build a journaling practice by trying to write 10 pages a day. You build it by writing one sentence, and then the next, until the act of reflection feels less like a chore and more like a reset button you actually look forward to. You don't train yourself to stop reacting with anger, anxiety, or distraction by trying to be a completely different person overnight. You train yourself by pausing for just one breath the next time you feel triggered. That's a micro win. That's a neural interruption. That's a shift. The magic of micro wins is that they feel doable. They eliminate the resistance that usually accompanies big change. They sneak beneath the threshold of overwhelm and allow you to build trust with yourself, which more than anything else is the true root of discipline. Because at the end of the day, discipline is not about restriction, it's about alignment. It's about narrowing the gap between who you say you want to be and who you are in the smallest moments of your day. And if you want to narrow that gap, you have to start by building a streak of wins. Not giant wins, not impressive wins, but consistent wins that your subconscious can stack as evidence that you follow through, that you don't negotiate, that you do what needs to be done even when it's not exciting. Let's talk about structure. Pick one area of your life, just one, where you want more control, more consistency, more focus. Now ask yourself, what is the smallest possible action I can take in that area every day with zero excuses, even when I'm tired, unmotivated, overwhelmed, or busy? Make it so small that failure becomes impossible. Make it your new minimum standard, not your maximum ambition. Then track it every day, without fail. Not because the action is impressive, but because the repetition is transformational. And yes, it will feel insignificant. It will feel beneath you. It will feel like it doesn't matter. But that's only because your brain is used to measuring progress by outcome instead of measuring progress by integrity. And once you make that shift, once you start viewing every micro win as a vote for your new identity, you begin to build the kind of mental discipline that doesn't rely on mood, motivation, or external accountability. You become self-led. And that's when everything changes. Because once you've stacked enough wins, the compounding effect kicks in. You start waking up earlier without hitting snooze, not because it's easy, but because it's normal. You start moving your body regularly, not because it's dramatic, but because it's who you are now. You start saying no to distractions, not because you have superhuman strength, but because you've trained your brain to value clarity over chaos. And this is where most people miss the mark. They chase intensity for a week, burn out, and tell themselves they're not disciplined. But the truth is, intensity is easy. It's consistency that's rare. And consistency is built through micro wins. So if you want to be extraordinary, master the ordinary. If you want to be respected, respect your own process. If you want to stop breaking promises to yourself, stop making promises that are too big to keep and start keeping the ones that are small enough to repeat. Here's your challenge. For the next 30 days, track one micro win every day. It could be anything: a 5-minute workout, a 60-second pause before reacting, writing one sentence, drinking one glass of water first thing in the morning. Whatever it is, make it visible. Make it count. Make it yours. Because you don't build discipline by doing hard things once. You build discipline by doing easy things consistently until they no longer feel optional. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when you inevitably break your streak, because you will, and how to recover fast, without shame, without spiraling, and without starting over. Because even the most disciplined people in the world slip. But the difference is, they don't stay down. They bounce back fast. Chapter 9. Bouncing back after a slip. No matter how focused you are, no matter how many systems you've built, no matter how many days you've stayed on track, there will come a moment. Maybe when you're stressed, maybe when you're distracted, maybe when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, triggered, or caught off guard. When you will break the streak, when you will fall back into the old pattern, when you will give in to the craving, abandon the new habit, or repeat the behavior you thought you had buried. And when that moment comes, the question that will define your long-term success isn't why you slipped, because slips are inevitable. It's how fast you bounce back. This is the truth that separates people who change from people who stay stuck. Not that the successful never fall, but that they never stay down for long. Because slips don't ruin your progress. The story you tell yourself after the slip does. You see, the most dangerous part of relapse isn't the action itself. It's the shame spiral that follows. It's the voice that says, "I knew it, I'm not disciplined," or "Here we go again, I always mess this up," or "What's the point? I've already ruined it." And that voice, that inner critic masked as logic, is the real enemy. Because it doesn't just make you feel bad, it makes you identify with the failure. It convinces you that the slip wasn't a moment. It was a message, a signal that you're not cut out for change. And that belief is what keeps people stuck in the cycle. But here's the truth. Discipline is not about perfection. It never was. Discipline is about recovery speed. How quickly you can return to the behavior that aligns with who you want to become, even after you've stepped off the path. So the goal isn't to avoid every slip. The goal is to shorten the time between slipping and showing back up. Because every time you return faster than before, you're building resilience. You're telling your brain, I don't break. I recalibrate. And over time, that bounce-back reflex becomes automatic. So how do you actually do it? How do you bounce back when your momentum feels broken? First, you remove the drama. You don't label the slip as failure. You don't catastrophize. You don't start writing a whole narrative about how this proves something about you. You simply name what happened. I slipped. That's all. That clarity allows you to move forward. Second, you resist the urge to overcorrect. This is a trap, the idea that after a failure, you need to go harder to make up for it. You missed a workout, so you plan a 2-hour gym session. You binged, so you commit to fasting all day tomorrow. You skip your morning routine, so you try to double your habits the next day. But overcorrection is not recovery. It's punishment disguised as productivity. And it doesn't work, because it creates a binary, all in or all out. Instead, just return to your normal baseline. Reestablish the minimum habit that got you back on track before. Pick up where you left off, not with guilt, but with grace. Third, look for the trigger, not the temptation. What caused the slip? What moment, emotion, situation, or shift in your environment made the old habit feel available again? Was it exhaustion? Was it stress? Was it loneliness? Was it lack of planning? The slip is never random. There's always a pattern. And if you're willing to observe without judgment, you'll find a crack in the foundation. And once you find it, you can reinforce that spot, not to be perfect, but to be prepared. Fourth, reattach to your why. Most people fall off track because they forget why the track mattered. They lose sight of the future they're building. So in that moment after the slip, pause and ask, who am I becoming? And how does this next choice reflect that? Because one decision doesn't define you, but it does influence your trajectory. And if you return quickly, if you realign with your purpose, you don't lose momentum. You actually strengthen it. Finally, track the return, not the streak. Too many people measure progress by how long they can go without slipping. But what if you measured how quickly you come back? I returned within an hour. I stopped the scroll after 5 minutes. I noticed myself slipping, and I redirected the loop. This builds self-trust. This trains your nervous system to bounce, not spiral. And this is the true mark of growth. Not perfection, but resilience. You become someone who can't stay down for long. You become someone who forgives fast and adjusts faster. You become someone who isn't afraid of falling because you've trained yourself to rise. So here's the challenge. Reframe the next slip as data. Not as failure. Not as identity. Just information. Use it. Learn from it. Let it sharpen you. Because your habits are not built in moments of motivation. They're built in moments of return. And every time you bounce back, you become stronger. Not because you never fall, but because you're no longer afraid to fall. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how to take everything you've learned and automate it. How to build systems that protect your progress and turn daily discipline into a lifestyle that runs without force. Chapter 10. Long-term success and automation. By now, you've come to understand that breaking bad habits and building powerful new ones isn't about a single decision, a single moment of willpower, or a temporary burst of motivation. It's about constructing an internal system that replaces guesswork with clarity, that shifts emotional reactions into purposeful action, and that ultimately automates your self-discipline so that the behavior you once had to force becomes the behavior you now follow without negotiation. Because the ultimate goal of this transformation isn't just to stop doing what's hurting you or to start doing what's good for you. It's to live in alignment so consistently that your habits no longer feel like something you need to manage. They simply become an extension of who you are. And the only way to make that shift from struggle to flow, from effort to rhythm, is to design your environment, your schedule, your mindset, and your identity in a way that protects your progress by default. So you're no longer relying on discipline in the traditional sense, but on systems that quietly support the identity you've built over time. Let's be clear, automation does not mean laziness. It doesn't mean living passively or setting your life on autopilot without intention. It means structuring your life so intelligently that you remove unnecessary friction, eliminate decision fatigue, reduce temptation, and give your best self every advantage to succeed before your lesser impulses have a chance to take over. Because when you're trying to change your behavior moment by moment, deciding what to eat in the moment, when to wake up, whether to scroll, whether to skip the workout, whether to stick to the routine, you're constantly exhausting your willpower, and willpower, as you've seen, is a finite resource. But when your default environment nudges you in the direction of discipline, when your workspace is clean, your triggers are removed, your calendar protects your priorities, your phone is out of reach, your routines are locked in, and your identity is reinforced through your actions, you stop needing to get motivated, and you start simply living the system. So how do you build that? First, optimize your environment. And I don't just mean clean your room, although that helps. I mean, look at your physical space through the lens of behavior design. Ask yourself, does this space make it easier or harder to follow through on my goals? If your fridge is full of junk food, if your phone is by your bed, if your notifications are on, if your desk is cluttered with distractions, if your reminders are buried under apps, then you're creating a daily uphill battle that you don't need to fight. Make it easy to do the right thing. Make it hard to do the wrong thing. That's the first layer of automation. Second, lock in your keystone habits, the small, repeatable routines that act as anchors for the rest of your behavior. It might be a morning stretch, a journal entry, a daily walk, a nighttime shutdown ritual, whatever it is, make it non-negotiable. Don't wait until it feels good. Don't decide each day. Lock it in, because the more you ritualize the important, the less space you leave for chaos. Third, design your day ahead of time. Don't wake up and see how you feel. Create structure. Put your habits on the calendar. Make time visible, because when you leave your priorities to emotion, urgency will always override importance, and bad habits thrive in the absence of a plan. When you automate your time, you liberate your mind. Fourth, systemize your wins. Whatever habits have worked for you, write them down. Document your process. Create a checklist. Build a template. Treat your life like a business and your discipline like a product, because what gets systemized gets sustained. Finally, and most importantly, continue reinforcing your identity. Remind yourself daily of who you are becoming and why it matters. Don't let your vision fade just because your routine becomes familiar. Remember, the point of all this is not to become robotic. It's to become reliable. It's to become someone who can be trusted with their goals, their time, their energy, someone who no longer needs to debate their standards because those standards are woven into the structure of their life. You've come a long way. You've studied your triggers. You've learned how to rewire loops. You've replaced destructive habits with empowering ones. You've shifted from motivation to identity. You started craving discipline more than comfort. Now it's time to stop chasing control and start designing it. Let your habits serve you. Let your system support you. Let your identity speak for you without needing to say a word. This isn't the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a new rhythm, one where success doesn't come from effort, but from alignment, where you no longer fear the old you because you've built a system the new you can live in confidently and freely. This is the final chapter, but your story is just beginning.